Hey, what's going on everyone? Sam here from Lake Pro Tackle. Guys, this video we're going to be going over one of my favorite springtime techniques going into the pre-spawn and the spawn time. This technique can get a ton of bites. Not a lot of people do it. It's a little sneaky technique, and if you know about it, you know how effective it is. I'm going to go over some of my tips and tricks on how to have the most efficient way to fish this technique, and as well as some rigging techniques that I like to do to help my hookup ratio go through the roof. So we're going to be talking about these floating worms here. They come in a bunch of different colors. This one is Zoom's. It's in the merthiolate color. Z-Man's got a couple as well, and they've got hot chartreuse, bubblegum, and the same merthiolate color. We're going to be going over these worms here, how you can catch fish on them during the springtime, and why they are so effective. Before we get into the video, guys, I would really appreciate if you leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, check out our social media page at Lake Pro Tackle on Facebook and Instagram. It really helps the channel grow. We want to make sure we can get as much information out to different people as possible. You know, we've got a bunch of cool stuff. I'm here in the store right now. We're in Gainesville, Texas. We've got a bunch of rods, reels, and tackle available. So if you want to go head over to lakeprotackle.com, you can find everything in this video here. Links down below in the description. You can check it out for yourself. We've got very competitive prices, guys. Free shipping on orders over $50. So go check that out. We're going to hop into the video here, and we're just going to hop into kind of why I like this technique and kind of why it's so effective in the springtime. So this technique here, like I said earlier, it is a very simple technique. It doesn't take a lot of skill to use this technique. More or less, this is basically just a weightless Texas rig, but you're going to be fishing it a little bit differently than just your traditional Senko or traditional fluke or something like that. So these guys here in the springtime, when we go into the pre-spawn and into spawn, these fish are going to be set up looking to eat. They're going to be very opportunistic eaters, and that's why a lot of the times topwater bites, your shad style crankbaits are going to get bit so much more than dragging a worm offshore or doing something like that, maybe with like a deep diving crankbait. These fish are wanting to eat to feed up for spawn, because spawn can last a very long time. You know, the female fish is going to get as big as it can, lay its eggs, and it's going to be so tired it can't focus on eating. So these female fish, even the male fish, they've got to protect the bed. They can't go run off and eat a lot of food, so they're going to be wanting to get as fat as they possibly can to store up enough energy to get through the spawn. So these fish, when they see something that looks like a meal that they can eat, that can stand out, like this color here or some of these Z-Man colors here, when they see something like that, something in their mind just triggers, and they're like, man, I have to eat that. So these colors here, as opposed to your traditional green pumpkins, black and blues, watermelons, these colors here get those fish's attention. And one of the biggest things is with fish, you know, largemouth bass especially, their eyes are pointed up. So they always generally will feed up. And that's one thing I've noticed fishing with forward-facing sonar a lot, is that you can't put that bait below them. They're not going to chase down on a bait. They're going to be chasing baits that are usually above them, and they're going to be feeding on a whole bunch of different forage in the springtime, whether it be shad, bluegill, crawfish. Anything in the springtime is basically fair game. You know, frogs are a big one. That's why topwater strikes in the springtime can be super aggressive. Those fish are looking up, constantly looking for food. So this color here is going to be super, super effective at getting that fish's attention. Even in dirty water, even in pretty clear water, I've caught fish in about 5 to 7 foot of visibility on the bubble gum, as well as the chartreuse. When it gets a little darker water, I like to go to the merthiolate here. And you know, each of these worms is a little different. This Zoom worm isn't actually a full floating worm. It does sink a little bit, but the way I like to fish it, it keeps it on top of the water. And these guys here, these Z-Man ones, are truly floating worms, and these are super effective as well. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about some of the ways, or really the main way I like to rig this bait. And that is gonna be a weightless Texas rig. I'm always gonna have, almost always gonna have, an offset worm hook. These are my two favorites here that we have in store. This one here is the Berkley Fusion 19. This one here is the offset worm needlepoint in the 2/0 size. And then this one here is the Gamakatsu offset shank worm RB hook. And this guy comes in a pack of 6. This one comes in a pack of 7. They're almost the same price. The Gamakatsu is just a little bit cheaper because it has less hooks in it. But both these hooks share one thing in common, is that they're super thin wire hooks. Not super, super thin. You can bend these out. If you pull super, super hard, like if you get it stuck in a stump, you can pull it out. It's going to bend out. But on fish, these hooks are not going to bend out on you. I haven't had any issues with either of these here. These two are going to be my favorite. Now, the reason I do the straight shank or the offset worm hook as opposed to something like an EWG is what happens is as you work this bait through the water, an offset EWG has a lower center of gravity, and what happens when you pull that bait, and we'll get into how to work your bait a little later on, is when you work that bait with an EWG style hook, that weight drives the worm down. So this one here, since it's a regular offset worm hook, it keeps that weight nice in line with that worm, and what'll happen is it keeps it up on top of the water when you work it. So I'm just gonna do a regular Texas rig with this worm here, just going through the top. If you wanna see videos on how to Texas rig, I can put some up, or there's plenty of resources on the internet to show you how to Texas rig, but I'm not gonna go very far into the worm. I'm only gonna go maybe an 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, as little plastic as I can on the tip of this worm, Tex pose it in the back there around that little egg sac area. And that's gonna be how I rig this worm. It's gonna be very simple, doesn't take a lot of work, and honestly, probably one of the easiest ways you can just rig any bait, especially with these Z-Man ones here. You can, since it's Elastec and it's very stretchy, a great thing about it is when you barely put a little bit of plastic on that nub, you know, this plastic won't rip or anything, it's just gonna stretch and get out of the way. So Tex posing, having that minimal plastic on your hook is really easy with these Z-Man ones. I generally go through a lot more of these Zoom ones because they are not Elastec, but the great thing about it is it comes in a pack of 20. So this one pack here will last me all day, won't have any issues with it. And you know, even if you just start biting your worm down, they still work just as fine. You might have a little issues when it comes to when you twitch it, it wants to roll a little bit. You want to keep that bait as straight in the water as you can. And the great thing about this is when you work it, that hook, the reason it's a 2/0 hook as opposed to something like a 4/0 or a 5/0 is that that smaller hook allows this worm to just swim on top of the water. It just sits on top and it snakes around. It kind of looks like a fleeing bluegill, a fleeing shad on top of the water, and those fish can't help but eat it. So we're gonna go ahead and hop into the setup that I'd like to use. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. Not one way is the right way. I'm gonna say that right now. You know, you don't have to have a super exact rod for this. You can fish a wide variety of different rods. My favorite, my personal favorite, action and power is going to be something along the lines of a 7-foot to 7'2" medium moderate action rod. And the reason I like to have that moderate action is it really allows me to set the hook and keep that fish pinned. That fish is going to be moving typically in shallower water, and that fish is going to be moving super, super fast. So having that moderate action allows that rod to load up as that fish runs around and does crazy stuff. Now, when it comes to the reel, I'll be throwing anywhere from a 25 to a 3000 size reel, braid to fluorocarbon leader, and that's just kind of how I like to fish it. So the rod, again, you want to have a little bit of action, not too much backbone on it to where you rip that hook out of that fish's mouth, but that is going to be my baseline. Now, when it comes to the braid to fluorocarbon, I'm going to have anywhere from 10 to 15 pound braid, something pretty thin, easily castable, and my leader choice is going to be a 10-pound line. This is the Seaguar Tatsu. This is my favorite leader line. Some other ones I might suggest are something like the Daiwa Samurai fluorocarbon. It's a great line as well. It's going to be very thin, very abrasion resistant, and definitely worth the extra money to get a better leader line. So this one here is a 10-pound line. I'm gonna start at 10 pounds generally. If I'm fishing very nasty cover like lily pads, stumps, or very matted vegetation, I might go up to 12, but 10 pounds is gonna be my baseline. If I'm fishing really clear water, I'm gonna go down to around an 8-pound or 6-pound even. And again, back to those thin wire hooks here, you don't have to worry about the hookup that much. You know, this hook's not going to bend out, and even with 6-pound line, this thin gauge wire hook is going to get into that fish's mouth and keep it pinned. So I talked about it a little bit earlier, but when it comes to different colors, just kind of match it naturally based on the water clarity. You know, the chartreuse one is pretty good in almost any water. The bubble gum is going to be pretty good in clear water. And then the merthiolite, this is going to be the brightest, most obnoxious one, is going to be great in a little dirtier water. Now, I don't know exactly how fish see color in water, you know, when it comes to reds and browns and stuff. You know, people say match the hatch, and I mean, you can do that. You're definitely going to get bit, but what makes a fish want to eat a chartreuse squarebill as opposed to a shad squarebill? Well, it has to do with the water clarity. So definitely match your water clarity up with the worms you're throwing. If you want any more information, guys, drop a comment down below, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm watching it all the time. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm gonna pop in a little more footage here of the worm working on top of the water. Again, follow our social media at Lake Pro Tackle, Instagram and Facebook, and we really appreciate it. If you follow the channel here, leave a like on the video, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching, guys.